Hi, and welcome back to Tuba People TV, where we're here to talk about all things Arnold Jacobs all of the time. I'm here again on location in the great state of Illinois, and I have with me here Mr. Charles Schuchat. Charles is professor of tuba at Roosevelt University, as well as Northern Illinois University, and is the principal tubist of the Elgin Symphony. Charles, welcome.
Nice to be here. Good to see you.
Thank you. Now, Charles, we were in school together many years ago.
Many years ago.
At Northwestern and studying with Mr. Jacobs. Maybe could you just describe when you first encountered Mr. Jacobs?
I'd love to. When I first was at Northwestern, Mr. Jacobs was not the tuba teacher there. He returned after a couple years. So I started to study with Mr. Jacobs outside of Northwestern. I think my first lesson was probably January of 1980. And I studied with him for almost 20 years after that, until 1998 when he passed away.
Yeah, that's great. And with that course of time, the 18, 20 years, did you notice any difference in his pedagogy, his teaching style, or the content of his teaching?
That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure. It's hard to answer that because, of course, I changed over those 20 years, and so was he changing because I was evolving, or was he evolving? When I first started to study with him, it was occasional because I wasn't in school with him, studying with him through school. And then my last 2 years at school, he was the teaching all the time, so I had lessons with him weekly. And after that, I studied with him for about 3 years in the civic orchestra, so I had very regular lessons after that, at that point. And then following that, it was just, sometimes I'd see him. If I had something coming up, I might play for him every week, but it might be months in between lessons after that. And then even, usually 3 or 4 times a year I would certainly see him. But so the lessons, of course, when they're working every week, they're going to have one dynamic, and then when you're more occasional, they're going to have a different dynamic. The one thing I really noticed as I continued to work with him, and we got over some of his basic concepts and my own development of my fundamentals, he absolutely insisted on my highest standard from the moment. It's like the moment I took the tuba out of the case. If I did that wrong, I had to do it again. If I just started to take a breath before I played a note and it wasn't my best, I had to stop and do it. And then it was very frustrating because you needed to clear your throat before you really got going. No, it had to be the highest standard all the time. And that meant the very first breath, the very first sound you made. Everything had to be, and just the best he'd ever heard you do it. So if you'd had this crazy great day, then every day had to be that great from then on. And he would say to me, I remember the last thing he told me was, "You can do better." And it kind of annoyed me because I thought I was doing pretty well. And I can see where he's continuing to teach me now because I know I can do better.
So you hear that voice in your thoughts?
I do. And for a while it would bother me. And now I realize it's great. He's still with me.
I do remember him saying, in my own lessons, if I did something well, then he said, well, if you can do it once, you can do it repeatedly. You just have to insist upon that from yourself. You have to set that standard and then adhere to it.
Right.
Was there anything in particular in your lessons with Jacobs that he maybe was drawn to with you as a student? Anything in terms of maybe sound or lyricism or technical passages, or was there something that he focused on or tried to bring out from you?
Well, I always sound was so important to him, tone production, but that became, it wasn't sound alone, it was phrasing and making music. And the one thing I always felt like he liked my phrasing, but he said something, I can't remember how he put it, but it's like, but you have to be, that was a beautiful phrase, in the heavens they would cry the way you played that, but they won't hear you.
Uh-huh.
You have to project that, what you just did. You know, you have to really make sure everybody can hear that phrase you played. You have to exaggerate and project, I guess. So he really, and that's when you kind of get out of yourself and you really play so easily, when you're really, you're not being careful, you're just projecting.
I remember.
I hope I said that loud enough for the camera.
We'll see. I remember one time we had oftentimes we'd have our lessons back to back.
When we were in school and we were in civic together too.
That's right. Yeah, and that was always nice. A lot of times Charlie and I would have lessons on the same day, and we'd go back to school.
I'd be at 3 and you'd be at 4, or vice versa. Or something
yeah,
like that.
We'd go back and debrief each other and compare notes as to what we learned, and it did seem as if there would be sort of this. Maybe there would be a theme of the day, perhaps, where maybe somebody earlier in the day set the tone, and he'd be thinking about that. Do you remember any of that in terms of this thread that would run through our lessons?
Not so much as he just would get frustrated, like, why are you all doing that? You know, or I remember he gave me a hard time about the shirt I was wearing. Why do you all have to wear shirts like that? I can't see what you're doing. You know, he was never, I mean, sometimes he'd tell you he was analyzing you physically, but if he couldn't see the way you were breathing, please don't wear those blousy shirts when you come to a lesson. I can't see how you're breathing when you wear a shirt like that. Come on.
I know it's middle of winter. Middle of winter, you have your sweater,
right?
Sweater on, and yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to me that much of what he's known for is really respiration, and but I think for those of us who's had the opportunity to study with him over a long period of time, or perhaps more advanced students who had hit and run lessons with him, who maybe were pretty well set physically speaking, the musical aspect to him was always the most important.
Oh, it always was, yeah.
Yeah.
Because the breathing wasn't important, the respiration wasn't important if you were singing and it was projected. It didn't matter.
Right.
So just to get to that point was the most important thing, I think.
I remember him saying, and maybe you heard this also, you go ahead and play it all wrong, but if you sound great, then I don't care. I mean, I don't care how you do it as long as you sound great.
I think that's true.
I think it's true.
Okay, I wasn't always sure, like if he'd be ever, would you just give me a chance to sound great? You won't even let me. I'm holding the tuba a little different. No, you have to do it the same.
Charlie, I remember one time when we had our lessons back to back, there was a very memorable occurrence. It had to do something with one of those newfangled chromatic tuners. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, that's a great story. We'd had our lessons scheduled. I was first, and you were second.
Yeah, I think that's the way it was.
And you had been killing time before your lesson because we'd ridden down probably together on the train or something. And you came at the end of my lesson, and you was walking into the studio for your lesson, and you said, "Hey, they have those new." I was upstairs at Performers Music on the 9th floor of the Fine Arts Building, and I was looking around, and they have those new chromatic tuners. And this is more than 25 years ago, and they were brand new. You always had to, before that, you'd had to choose what note you wanted to tune and set the dial to A, and then set the dial to G or F. And it was a big deal that these things automatically knew what note you were going to play and could tune it. And so, hey, they have these new chromatic tuners. And Mr. Jacobs loved gadgets. He loved anything that was new like that. He loved to play around with it. So he said, I guess to me, hey, why don't you go up and get me one of those? So,
was that with his money, or did he give you a credit card?
I think he probably had an account. He might have given me money, but he might have had an account. I think he had an account with it. He was pretty famous. They would have let me do it. So I went upstairs and I got the tuner, and I interrupted your lesson because normally wouldn't do something like that, but Mr. Jacobs was pretty excited about this new toy. So I interrupt the lesson, I bring it in, and he wants to see how it works. So you're playing, and he's trying to figure out how to tune you make it tune you. Is that the right way to say it? Anyway, he could not figure out what he was doing. He just was turning it off instead of adjusting it or whatever. It just wasn't working. So you suggested, hey, Mr. Jacobs, I'll play, and you play, and I'll show you how it works. So Mr. Jacobs, took your tuba. He took your tuba, that brass, big Holton, beautiful horn, and we showed him how the device worked. And it was funny because he picked up your tuba, and he starts playing, and the needle didn't move. It was
standing at attention.
Standing at attention at 0. It wasn't sharp, wasn't flat. It just stayed still. It didn't go like that at all. It just stayed still. And then the notes are changing, C, D, E, F, G, but the needle doesn't change. And it's like, whoa, I'd never seen anything like that, where the pitch was so intense and in tune that the needle didn't budge. And we said, Mr. Jacobs, I don't think you need this. He goes, oh yes, I don't need it, but it's important for me to see how one of these things work, for my students and for other people. But yeah, I don't need it. So that was pretty intense that his pitch was that good.
I've never seen anything like it since.
Yeah. You thought the device was broken. It was
because the needle was not moving. It was motionless, and yet he was playing up and down a scale, but the needle wasn't moving at all.
Yeah, but the pitches were changing. It did register the change of pitch.
Yeah.
I have a thing on my iPad. I have the strobo tuner thing.
Yeah.
And whenever I get real low, it just stops. It gives up on telling me the right note. Everything is a low G. So I don't know what Mr. Jacobs would think of an iPad.
Well, I've been telling that story, or trying to tell that story to Puddles for some time, because I know Charlie, he tells it better than I do, and so I'm so glad that Puddles finally had a chance to...
Did you have a question, Puddles?
Puddles is always formulating a question, but he has a hard time really getting it out. So, but one thing he did say, Puddles, before we left Eugene was, we are going to see Mr. Schuchat, so we should bring along something nice thank you gift. So Puddles has directed me to give you, as a thank you gift, this very lovely jar of University of Oregon duck jam, and we hope that you'll enjoy spreading around the duck jam on all things toasted.
That's terrific. Thank you, Mike and Puddles. Thank you so much. That's excellent. It's just been my pleasure, and I'll continue to remember it.
Thanks, Charlie.
Anytime.
All right, back to you in the studio.